Well, hello, everybody. My name is Roger Durling. I'm the executive director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and I'm very excited to talk with the filmmakers and the subject from the incredible documentary Rebuilding Paradise. The Hollywood Reporter says that it is a sincere and skillfully assembled tribute to a community's fortitude. Please welcome the great Ron Howard, producer Sara Bernstein, and subject Woody Culleton. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. And I'm gonna,
Pleasure.
Thank you for having
yeah,
us.
yeah, and Sarah, I'm gonna jump right in with you. And I was telling Ron that I've seen the film a couple of times, and I've always been impressed with the way you guys end up the film. That it puts what happened in the campfire with the campfire in a global conversation. Can
Mhm.
you tell us how do you arrive to that to that ending?
Oh, sure. I mean, and like this is something that obviously we gave a lot of thought to, and Ron especially. We always wanted to be able to raise the global issues around climate change and frankly really climate change refugees, people like the
Mm,
citizens of Paradise who were forced to evacuate, forced to relocate. How do you best sort of convey these kind of overall sort of themes, and how do you attack it in a what is a cinema verite, as we say, film, which is meant to be incredibly immersive and really focused on the community of Paradise. So I think we've really struggled, and Ron can certainly talk more about this, like when is the best time to sort of introduce sort of the other areas around the world that are facing similar tragic scenarios and disaster
Yeah.
scenarios like Paradise. And I think we felt that after you've seen this entire kind of sweep of a film, and we've spent a year with the community and with people like Woody as they, rebuild, try to recover, and gain, some sort of control over their lives again, it felt like that was sort of the right moment at the end to zoom out and really let
correct.
the audience think about sort of the greater effects of
Yeah.
this.
No,
Ron,
it's
I don't know
very,
if you have
it's
anything you
very,
want to add to that.
no,
Yeah.
it's very impactful because we've been so specific to that
Yeah.
world, and then all of a sudden, boom,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
it's so interesting when you're, and this is kind of standard operating procedure here with the documentary. But for me, it's sort of new territory because a big structural idea like that is something that in a scripted project, you'd be thinking about long and hard. That doesn't mean that you might not have a eureka idea late in the post-production process and do something different. But in this case, I always knew I wanted to make sure the audience recognized that this wasn't just about fires, and it wasn't just about Paradise, and it wasn't just about this segment of our population or the world's population. It was that this kind of thing was happening when we're all fragile in ways that we might not anticipate. And when you see one of these disasters, it's important to recognize that there is going to be this long struggle in the aftermath of it,
mhm,
physically, financially, emotionally, and everything. And we had kept trying it in different ways. We tried just sort of tossing it in certain moments in the middle. I think that's what Sarah's remembering, is for a long time we sort of stopped the movie for a section and try to give people that sort of context. And we realized that because the film did turn out to be so much of a character piece,
mhm,
where you weren't really following ideas, you were following people. And
people,
that
yeah,
heartbeat was something that we wanted to sustain, but we still wanted to make the point. And finally, fairly late in the game, we decided that's our ending. Let's remind people at the end that, oh, this journey you've been on with these people, they're not alone. This is not unique. Look at all of these kinds of disasters, and just now recognize that what it means in the most human on the most human levels to people who I'm sure are very much like those people that you've gotten to know and understand through the movie.
Yeah, I want to follow up on something that you were talking about, the trajectory of the story. When did you guys understood from the get-go that there's like a classic structure to this story, that where you have the tragedy happen, then you have the perseverance and the struggle, and then ultimately the coming together of this community? Did you guys understood from the get-go that you had this?
Well, one of our producers, Liz Morheim, at a certain point brought in this sort of graph, this graph. It's the cycles of grief, and we immediately began to recognize that there weren't just one or two characters who were experiencing this. The entire town was experiencing this, and it very much fit with that sort of what's been come to understand to be this sort of human experience in the wake of a tragedy. Like that. And it helped us because that discovery was, probably at about, I don't know, about halfway through making the film, but it helped us focus sort of what to look for, what to expect, and what kinds of questions to ask about what people who we were following, what they had already been through. And again, to sort of anticipate, what the town and what some of the individuals might be going through.
Woody, how did they gain your trust?
With $100 bills.
Not at all, by the way. This is a documentary.
They're going to believe you, Woody.
I know.
It was Liz and Jan were just tremendous people, and we had been.
Those were our two producers who spent a good sizable amount of their time on the ground in Paradise with the community.
Yeah, and they were personable. What happened to us is right after the fire, there was so much media here, and it was very exploitive. And we were in shock and awe and dazed and confused, and we were offended by it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But, when Ron's team got here, they were just personable, and they let us know that they were here to tell our story. So they gained our trust right away. Ron showed up, and it really helped. Because a lot of us, most all of us, know his work and have known him. I've been growing up watching all of the stuff he did. So it was real easy to become involved with the group. And they filmed a lot of people in town. And, some of us, we didn't know, I think it was until sometime in December of the following year that we were even into film. We were being filmed. We agreed to do that to let our different segments of what we were having to go through be filmed. But it was real late in the game before we knew we'd made the cut. But it was the people that we were working with. They were truthful with us. They weren't just trying to make something for the 6 o'clock news. They weren't exploiting us. They wanted to know who we were, what it was like, what we were feeling, and we trusted them. They're people. They're wonderful people.
Right before we came on live, I was talking to you about the fact that it reminded me of River City. It also reminded me of Grover's Corners or other small town movies. I just watched It's a Wonderful Life, so I was thinking about Bedford Falls. The fact that we get to know all of these people. When did it come to for your understanding that you needed to focus on the community?
Well, first of all, that idea of small town America and the way it's been depicted in movies and television shows, well, there's a reason. And that's because those towns existed and they still exist. And my mother-in-law lived most of the last 4 years or so of her life in Paradise, California. And I'd been there a number of times. I knew it was a jewel of a town, and interesting in that it's not a tourist destination. It doesn't exist because of a single company or something like that. It's at one point it was gold mining, and another point it was logging. But now it's just it's a great place to live. And people serve each other and they work in nearby communities, but they're there because they want to be. And it's very understandable when you spend some time, but it's not, it's not affluent. It's economically solid, although there are a lot of people who are just barely hanging on. And you recognize after a catastrophe like this, that's who really gets unseated first and foremost. If there's a struggle and then, the rug gets pulled out from under you in this way, it's devastating. And a lot of those people just evaporated. And we began following the people who were determined to stay. In our mind, Rebuilding Paradise was a kind of a working title with a question mark. And we weren't sure, the town was 95% gone. But because I had a connection to the town, when I started seeing that devastation, that question came to mind. My assistant, Louisa Vellis, who's also an exec producer on the film, she was the first one to say it. Man, how will they ever rebuild? Maybe that's a title, Rebuilding Paradise. And I called Sarah, I called Justin Wilkes, who works with Sarah on Imagine Documentaries. And I said, I've been interested in making a verite documentary. Is this a subject? And they kind of said, well, you don't know until you begin to shoot it. That's the way it works with verite. And how quickly can you get there? And we sent a team ahead of me. A couple of days after them, I was there, and it was shocking to the system, heartbreaking to the soul to see people, really dealing with it. And the news, of course, captures some of it, but not all of it. And I within a month, I think we had some interviews. We'd been there 2 or 3 times, and shared some footage with Nat Geo, and we've done a lot of work with Nat Geo at Imagine Entertainment in the last few years. And Carolyn Bernstein and Courtney Monroe just stepped up. And by then, I had this idea. We don't know what the story will be, but let's take a time frame. Let's at least understand what it's like a year later and what it means to get to live a year in the aftermath of something like this. And they supported us. And fortunately, the town and so many people in the town, they did. I think they found our presence a little bit cathartic once they recognized that we really were trying to tell the larger story, not just of the tragedy, the immediate tragedy, but of the journey in the wake of all of that. And I think they began to feel a responsibility to share. I felt it when I was there immediately. They wanted me to look at their cell phone footage. I was at the police department. They wanted to show me body cam footage, not to shock me, but just to try to help me understand what they just experienced. And that's when I began to get the notion, not so much of beginning the film with an entire sequence, but definitely using this footage. And we began collecting it, and Zan and Liz created a Facebook page where they requested this footage, and suddenly we were flooded with just hours of it. But as it came together in the editing room, that became our opening, because it was just the way to convey to audiences right away, this is what these folks just lived through. That's it.
Yes.
Sarah, what's one of the things that was the most impactful to me is that we're used to seeing documentaries where you see the damage, the physical damage, but you guys dig into the emotional and psychological damage that this town is undergoing. Can you talk about that approach?
Yeah, I think, as Ron was saying, and as Woody actually, I think, said, pretty well, this idea that we weren't interested, like many crews that maybe were there for a week or two, or even the days after the initial campfire and that immediate tragedy. We weren't interested in just, jumping in, jumping out. Like, we really wanted to spend time in this community. And I think what was really important as we spent time and as we gained trust, and as, you know, the community and people like Woody would open their lives to us, that we were there for these really important moments that they were going through or that they were struggling with. I mean, with Woody, I think you see it really beautifully. You really understand his connection, not only as someone who had been a former mayor in the town, but also as a, you know, as a member of the town, as somebody who built a house, who had roots and had it just taken away from him. And so it was so important for him to be able to be one of the first people to, you know, to start that foundation, to rebuild, so to speak, but really rebuild in the most meaningful visual way possible. So I think for us to be there along the way, to see him sort of just, you know, looking at sort of, you know, assessing kind of the rubble, the aftermath, and to see him again sort of thinking about his actual blueprints and the plans for how is he going to design this house, and to be there as he's actually physically, you know, putting stakes in it, hammering himself. And then that beautiful moment with Woody when he walks his wife into the house. I mean, that's the emotion. So to be able to, like I said, just to have the privilege really of being allowed into people's lives, I think that was the most important thing for us, because I also think, as you know, the best documentaries are emotional. I mean, we can have people, you know, talking to camera in interview form, you know, explaining the effects of something, explaining that they lost their house, but unless you're watching them and with them as they're assessing the damage or living through these moments with them, it's hard to get that sort of emotional sense. And like I was saying, to me, those are the best documentaries, the ones where you actually experience what your people or your subjects are experiencing.
I think they gave us some great. I think they gave us some great clues about a couple of things too that are pretty universal, beyond a little town in trouble.
Yeah.
You know, that are applicable in big ways. One is that I felt. And Woody, it'd be interesting because now you're there. I felt that the people who were doing the best, recovering the best, were the ones who were actively engaged. They were showing up. They were at the Gold Nuggets days. They were at the town council. They were willing to participate beyond their own survival in the greater survival of community. And that investment in community, for different reasons, might have begun with an initial need, but I felt like the people who, you know, we're going to do the best coming out of this were those people who were looking out for themselves, but also thinking about the community. And part two, and I'd love you to comment on that, Woody, but part two is that you actually, the problem solving was pretty amazing, because once those sort of community leaders or the people who are showing up, call them activists, because that's what they were. They, you know, they're not out there with protesting, but they're trying to make something happen and make the system work. And they did. And those are not all people who think the same, you know, view the world in the same way, make their livings in the same way. You know, it's the thing they have in common is this problem that they could agree on, like how are we going to bring the town back? And I wish we could broaden that to sort of a sort of meeting in the middle, problem solving mentality that could go beyond the town of Paradise. But what do you feel like as you're there and the 4,000, 5,000 people who've dug in, do you feel, am I right about that?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's it's asked somebody, it's about community. I mean, and you know, we just had the film did the Christmas tree lighting as a part of the film. Well, this year with COVID and everything, we didn't do the Christmas tree lighting, but we had our Christmas, it was our 17th annual Christmas lighted truck parade that a local septic tank company started 17 years ago. And to enter the parade, you have to bring canned goods to donate for the food banks. And so we had, emotional, we had 47 entries. It was amazing. It was the best in the whole Northern California. The people loved It's a Paradise. And, you know, it was just incredible. I mean, the spirit that's here, and it is that. The film caught some really great, the traditions. That's the thing. We lost our heirlooms, and we lost our furniture, and we lost our stuff. But what they didn't take, the fire couldn't take, was our spirit. It was our community. And the part of the biggest tragedy was that loss of community in those early times.
Yeah.
You know, that's our routines. You know, it was, yeah, we lost our stuff and we lost some lives, unfortunately, but we lost our community and we lost those things that were familiar. That scene that Sarah mentioned when my wife and my daughter and I came back to our house, that is actually at 8:30 in the morning. On November 8th, 1 year later, that was the anniversary of the time we left our house during the fire. And yeah, you're right, Ron.
It was great you let us be in on that. And Michelle and Matt, even through difficult times, you know, what the tragedy that Michelle faced and the difficulties Matt was going through. And you know, those aren't stories of triumph. That's painful. And yet I think they began to recognize that, you know, it was important that audiences recognize that this, you know, it's not just a matter of getting a new roof under over your head, you know, that it's a longer problem. That fragility, I mean, I think intuitively, I sort of recognized it was, you know, that I didn't know. And yet it was going to be far more complicated than I could imagine to come back from that sort of devastation. But I don't think anyone can know until you really put it under a microscope and break it down. And I hope our film does that to some extent.
Yeah, I also, and to add to what you guys were talking about, from an observer point of view, also, there must have been differences, political differences, or in other types of difference in the community, but everybody seemed to just forget about that and work together. And that was very inspiring to observe.
Yeah. It was for us. It was for us too. And as Woody, in one of our interviews a while back, he just sort of said, "Well, you know, sometimes you can beat City Hall." He knew he knew a thing or two about it.
You had to be tenacious. You had to be, you know, and there, no, we didn't all agree, but like Ron was saying, we were all victims of this experience. We all had one goal, those of us that are still here and we're coming back. And there are still people that are trying to come back. They're not home yet. You know, we wanted to come home, you know, that's what it was about. And unfortunately for like our local elected officials were residents too. They lost their homes and they'd never been through anything like, there is no playbook, you know, even FEMA, you know, all these other people that do disaster recovery. You know, we're dealing with stuff right now. There are things that have never been done before, you know, and it's pretty interesting. A little update for everybody. Matt is remarried and happy and still on the police force and doing well.
Wonderful.
And Michelle has a new boyfriend and is doing really well.
And we haven't heard about that yet.
It's pretty cool.
That's great.
They're really great clients. So,
well, that's great. Matt's such a dedicated professional,
Yes.
and and I know he wasn't sure what kind of work he was going to do or where he was going to go, and that's really great news.
No, he's still here on the force and things are well.
Great.
One of the most powerful moments is when you start digging in, you know, into your home again, and the emotions catch up with you, everything that you've gone through. Can you talk about that day and
well, you know, so you just witnessed that. I mean, I cry on a dime, man. It's you know, it was there were so many hurdles, and I, I was so focused on getting home, and there were so many unknowns, there's so many challenges, there were so many delays. It was a really difficult time, and I was just really focused on that and overcoming those hurdles and working through whatever the unknowns were, and challenging City Hall, and because nobody knew what they were doing. I mean, it was a lot of chaos and a lot of difficulty. So I was just all focused on that, and I never really experienced or took the time. I didn't have time to sit down and feel any of what I had just been through. I was busy, but when we dug that first scoop of dirt,
Yeah.
It was happening.
Yeah.
it was a beginning. It meant all the hurdles
Yeah.
over. It meant the answers. It was, the battle was won. It's like it was the beginning of my home. It's going to be real, and within a short period of time. I think it took us 4 months or something. It was 390 days from the day of the fire to the day we had an occupancy and spent the night in our home. But that's, and there are people now that are still trying to get home. It's
Sarah, the film could have easily become about finding the culprit and investigating that side, but you guys stay away from, for the most part, you stay away from that. Can you talk about that choice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was important to have that information in the film, obviously, as it related, I think, to what people like Woody were actually experiencing. So I think when you are sort of confronted with or given that information as an audience, our choice was really to receive it through the subjects who we were following. So you have that moment where there is a PG&E representative who comes to town and puts himself in front of the community, and you can, to your earlier question, you emotionally are sort of wrapped up with how this community is responding to it. And I think that was just, much more important for us as filmmakers, that the information kind of comes across almost naturally to the viewer, as opposed to, trying to make this wasn't, I guess what I'm trying to say is it wasn't a journalistic investigative film, it was really a film about how does this one community cope with such a, incredible tragedy.
And the other thing was that, yes, we had to acknowledge sort of what they learned about this particular instance, but these disasters happen for a lot of different reasons. And so to sort of single in on that and say this is about power companies, not taking good enough care of their equipment and not being cognizant of the destruction that it could cause. That wasn't this story. This was, hey, if something like this happens, look what you might have to face. If something like this happens to a loved one, look what they might have to face. And what does that mean to you? And that's really all it boils down to. That's the entire communication, really, in my mind, and the reason to tell the story this way and to make the film.
And
I thought the story was about me.
And it is.
Brian, you alluded to the fact that you had all this footage. Can you tell us about the editing process? The fact that you had a year worth of material.
Well, Mickey and Gladys and others were toiling away, and we also had a deadline on this, and it was sort of you finish shooting in November and they want something in January. So we didn't have the luxury of sort of collecting a year's worth of footage and saying, all right, which threads do we want to follow? We had to try to be making decisions, as we went along. So we did cast the net very wide in terms of characters and factors and so forth. And we followed a lot of it. When our team couldn't be there, we even deputized a couple of local, filmmakers to cover things for us. And so we just had as much interfacing going on as possible, kept following individuals and so forth, and narrowing it down. And so the editing, I never saw all the footage. I don't even know how much footage we shot. I don't think anybody knows, because we were already trying to do something that you don't always do, which is begin to build scenes early on, knowing that the one thing we did know is we were going to go kind of in some form of chronological order. But the big surprise was we had this sort of bucket of first person fire footage, escape footage. And we looked at it first thinking, I thought, well, we'll parse this out various times to reflect, as people are telling their stories, what they went through. And yet when we had our first viewing, I mean, it was 5 or 10 minutes longer than what we have in now, but it was jaw dropping. It was immersive. And I couldn't help but think of Saving Private Ryan, and just feel like, well, this is the way to understand, drop the audience in the middle of this. And we all looked at each other, and we just kind of, it was almost unspoken. Just, well, that's the beginning of the film, right? We don't want to cut that up too much. And we didn't, Gladys particularly focused on that and did a great job.
Yeah, it was like it's 10 minutes, right?
I think it's about 8 minutes, minutes. Yeah.
Just under 10.
It's incredible. I mean,
Well, it's the most harrowing thing I've ever been involved with, on screen, as a sequence. I've directed some big action scenes, and even the movie Backdraft, where we generated a lot of chaos with fire. But because it's utterly real. And it provides, I think, audiences an immediate insight.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so well done that we've decided, us Paradisians, to make the entire production team and Ron and everybody honorary campfire victims, because they did such a good job of really telling, which is so true. I mean, that's the beauty of it, I think, is because those first 8 or 9 minutes is that's what it was like, and unless you've been through a tragedy, a hurricane, whatever, unless you've actually feared for your life in the midst of something like that, you really don't know what it feels like. But that first 10 minutes of this film really gives you a real good feeling of what it was really like.
Mm. Sarah, I think you mentioned it slightly, but did you guys always have the 1 year, mark that we're going to stop after 1 year?
Well, I think Ron, and I think Ron kind of, explained this pretty well earlier. I think it became clear to us that we needed to mark time, that we were going to follow the story chronologically, and because look, you could certainly follow this community for the next year and the following year. I mean, if we had followed them in 2020, we would have been following sort of a community in the wake of COVID on top of the campfire, right? But for us, I think it felt that a year was a real mark. It's a real milestone. And it gave us our ending. Mm-hmm. Obviously. And you can see all of the ups and downs, obviously, that everybody individually experiences, as well as the community.
Can I add something here? The beauty of the film, the way they did that, which I totally appreciate, is as you watch the film at 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and whatever, you're seeing all of us as we progress through the grief cycle. You're seeing, I mean, the way I was at the 1 month mark was a whole lot angrier than what I was at the 3 month or the 6 month arc. And it's just how it worked with us, And of course, we're all hoping it becomes like a Star Wars sequel with many very.
keep coming back.
But I threw that in there.
That might happen.
We'll
talk to Nat Geo.
let's just hope we don't have another really compelling reason to go to paradise.
No, I'm talking about
There is that documentary, 7 Up, and
it's true. Michael Apted.
Yeah, Michael Apted.
Well, I mean, weren't people evacuating this year? Woody, from Paradise?
What that again?
Wasn't there the huge fire and
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
people were
The end
beginning
of
to
the summer.
evacuate?
Came really close, and it triggered
Yes.
people. We had a mass evacuation once again, and you know, just there's a lot of different things, you know.
Which actually I had the question about, like, how is Paradise now preparing for future, you know, fires?
Well, we, you know, that type of fire, there's no way to prepare for it, other than to have a go bag ready. You're told to leave, you know, and have a full gas tank. But, you know, we're doing things like everybody, the building codes have been upgraded. Anybody that is building a home, you have to have, you know, fire, WUI compliant, wildland urban interface compliant building materials. You cannot attach wooden fences to your structure. You need to keep us, you know, cleared, defensible space around your structures. Number of things. We're widening roads. PG&E has made a commitment. One of the problems that caused people for the evacuation, and some people died as a result of the fire burned the telephone poles. They fell into the roadways. People couldn't get out. And so they're undergrounding our entire town. Now, AT&T and Comcast doesn't want to take their wires off the poles. So we haven't totally got rid of the poles yet, but that's our goal, is to eliminate the poles, put all the utilities underground. Makes it a lot, you know, if you had to evacuate for any reason, makes it a lot safer. So there's a lot
Is there
of
a ring around the town too, a kind of a fire?
You know, there's some of that. The problem with that type of thing, there's no funding to maintain it. But there are some people who are donating some of their property that aren't coming back. The Parks District is looking to try to create a buffer around the town. That's it's going to get it's going to get a little bit of legs, but it's going to it's not anything anybody wants to fund.
Yeah. Well, that's to me the big challenge here I'm, you know, I'm not the person who has to make a decision or even come up with a plan. But we, however, you whatever you believe about climate change, definitely there's just more activity in the world and more destruction in the wake of that. And so it is incumbent upon societies to sort of recognize, well, we may face something like that. What do we want to do to try to prepare for it? What can we invest in? What should we invest in? And what would we expect of our town, our state, our federal government? You know, should we be struck in this way? What would we really want? And you know, I think when you go a little deeper than just sort of casual thought of, well, I don't want to pay any more taxes. I think you can come up with some, some answers that are constructive, but it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge because, as Woody's saying, you could never anticipate everything.
Mm-hmm. Brian, I did wanted to ask you that you've done documentaries before. You did the Beatles documentary, the Jay-Z documentary, the Pavarotti, but this is the first you used the term cinema verite documentary you've done. Can you tell us about how you feel after doing this one? And
well, it's a high wire act from a filmmaking standpoint, because you do have to just go in and cover it, but I'm surrounded by people who have tremendous experience in this way, and now we even imagine documentaries. Even has a relationship with Alex Gibney's company Jigsaw. So I'm recognizing that it's its own kind of endeavor. It's an adventure. It's a mission. And I found it fascinating. And I learned so much from the people and from the filmmaking experience. So it's something that I'm, hope to do more of. Right now we're following Chef Jose Andres and World Central Kitchen and everything that they've been through in the last, during this last, 8-9 months. And going forward, and we're in the early stages of shaping that film. But once again, I'm just finding it inspiring, intellectually fascinating, and a great fresh filmmaking challenge that is also informing the scripted work that I'm doing. So at this point in my life, it's great for Imagine Entertainment. It's great for me as an individual. And I think, it's creatively stimulating. So I'm finding it incredibly gratifying, even though, I feel like it's new territory and I'm certainly out of my comfort zone. And I think that's great for me at this point. And I'm grateful for the opportunities and the associations. Look, the documentary community, it's a remarkable group of individuals. I really love hanging with them. I feel like they're smart, they're dedicated, they've learned a lot, and I'm loving kind of learning along with them, subject by subject.
Mm-hmm. And one last question to all three of you, but I'll start with Sara. About what is it that you want, people to get out of seeing Rebuilding Paradise?
Well, I mean, I think the timing of the release of Rebuilding Paradise couldn't be better. I think Nat Geo's decision to put it out in, some sort of theatrical capacity over the summer when we were really kind of in the thick of what was happening with COVID, and now having it sort of premiere on Nat Geo and be available on Hulu, I think it so resonates the message of this film, hopefully with communities around the world really at this point, which is a story of resilience. I think we are as a world kind of experiencing something so unprecedented. And I think people daily are not only clearly, losing loved ones, but losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods. And I think when you look at what the people of Paradise experienced and how they pulled themselves up and how they rallied as a community, and how they were able to rebuild. I think it's an incredibly universal message that, like I said, I hope really kind of hits home for people at this moment. I mean, I know that I personally just, take such tremendous kind of, pride and messaging as I watch sort of what they experienced. What it gave me, I guess, was a tremendous amount of courage. So I'm hoping that message translates right now when
And
people
Woody,
really need it.
Woody, you were
It's
so
hopeful.
yeah, absolutely. Woody, you were so generous, with your story, sharing it with us. What would you like people to get out of it?
Wow. Just hang in there, just keep on keeping on. You just got to, persevere. Just, if you got to get angry. I mean, just try to do the next right thing. I think the fire and what we went through has helped this community in dealing with this whole COVID thing. But we're wore out. It was like a double whammy, We're really tired of, it makes it really hard because what made us successful in trying to rebuild our town and rebuild our lives and pick up the pieces was community. The fact that we could see one another and hug one another and go help one another, and COVID has really put a hitch in that get along, because you can't hug your friend, your neighbor, and stuff. But we just keep doing it and hope we don't get.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ron, any?
Well, just to put the most kind of intimate, personal face on this coping, this process, and sort of a bridge toward some kind of a deeper sense of understanding and empathy. Look, this is a transformational period, whether it's, and we're feeling it. We're feeling it, sort of in terms of weather patterns, technology, what it's doing to the economy, what that means, what it's doing sort of geopolitically to all, human beings are going through a very unsettling time right now, and we can't quite understand what it means because we're in it. But I do think that that strength, that perseverance that Woody's talking about, that Sara finds in it, I think that by looking at a town and a kind of an ensemble, if you will, of individuals, I think you're going to find somebody whose situation you relate to, and that's my goal. and just imagine what it means, imagine what it could mean, and recognize that you can navigate these waters. It's possible. And here's how they did it.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed talking to the three of you, and thank you so much for the incredible documentary. It's so inspiring, and thank you.
I
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it. Thanks for the conversation, and I'm glad you liked the film.
Absolutely. Stay
Thank
well.
you so much.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Bye,
Next time in person.
Absolutely.
All right.